Welcome to colleagues who are joining. We've just opened the doors, as it were. What do we call the virtual doors? Anyway, the virtual doors have opened and people are just arriving. So I tend to do a bit of blathering at this point to try and fill the space. But you know that you're arriving and hearing real people in the room. But we haven't started, so don't worry about that. This is just the filler, and it's either this or I sing to you. So I think you're looking out. If it's not the singing, we're going to take that as a better outcome. It's lovely to see so many people arriving. And I'm actually also going to ask folks, hello, Helen, lovely to see you. I'm going to ask folks as you're arriving to, if you're up for it, would you mind sticking in the chat whether you're here today to think about this conversation and this topic of menopause and perimenopause as an individual, or whether you're here thinking and talking about it from the perspective of a school and thinking about a workplace. So if you would stick in the chat whether you're here from a workplace perspective or an individual perspective, that would be really interesting and helpful to us to just get a feel for what's bringing people here and where to think about it. And yeah, there's definitely going to be a few people who are both, but lovely to get a sense of what people are coming in the room to learn about. I think we may have everybody arrived. I think it looks like the numbers have stabilized a bit there, so we can I think start. And can I just say what a lovely and generous response to that question. You've all tapped furiously. Not everybody does. So I'm feeling deeply appreciative of that as we start. And I take that as a sense that we'll have a lively chat going on. And you'll see that there is a Q&A function there as well. And feel free to add your questions in. And I'll be looking at that as we go through, and we really, this is for you. So we want to make sure that we address the issues you want to hear about today. But let me begin by welcoming everybody. For anyone who doesn't know, Education Support is the charity that exists to support the mental health and well-being of everyone working in education. We've been doing that for 147 years. Very little of that 147 years have spent discussing menopause and perimenopause. So isn't it great to be here today to have a conversation on this topic? I am delighted to welcome two fantastic panelists to join us today on this. I should say, by the way, my name is Sinead and I'm the Chief Executive of Education Support. My background is I started my career in financial services, and then I've worked in the not-for-profit sector in a variety of places. I taught at university for a bit, and I've been chief executive here for 5 years. And I can say that I have personal experience of this topic to bring to play. So I'll be very happy to use myself as a source of humor if the opportunity allows. Anyway, more interestingly, let me welcome Jules Dolby, who is an assistant head, senior leader at a special school, and Jules has held various teaching and leadership roles across education and the charity sector, and her working life was directly affected by menopause. So she's bringing her professional experience, she's bringing her personal experience, and I think we're going to hear more about that as we go through. So welcome, Jules. Delighted to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Good to see
Delighted. You. And Helen Clare is joining us as a menopause educator and mentor. And Helen's work is around supporting individuals and schools. She does that through talks, workshops, support groups, one-to-ones. She's an ex-biology teacher and also a poet and an artist. So I love it when we find scientists who are artistic. It just makes me very happy. I take that home to my son, who doesn't believe the two can go together. So there you are. You've made my day, Helen. She's also an ICF trained coach and an associate of the British Menopause Society. And her website is menopauseinschools.co.uk. So you'll be able to find some support there as well. So welcome, Helen. Here we are. Let's get straight stuck in. And colleagues, I'll just remind you, feel free to chip into the Q&A if there is a direction you want the conversation to go, and we'll do our best to make that happen. But Helen, I'm going to come to you first, if I may. I think we should start with just covering the baseline here, because I could make an assumption that anyone who's signed up knows what they've signed up for, but let's not make that assumption. What is menopause? What is perimenopause? What are the kind of classic symptoms? Please share your wisdom.
So menopause is the point, actually means, meno means month and pause means stop. So it's the point at which your periods stop. The problem is, of course, we don't know that they've stopped until they don't come back. So we generally say you've reached full menopause a year after your last period, and that would be 2 years if you're under 45. Around 10% of women do reach menopause before 45, and significant numbers sooner than that. Perimenopause is the period leading up to menopause, and that's a period of quite intense hormonal fluctuations, and very often that's symptom-wise the most troublesome part of the menopause transition. Once you've passed the menopause, that year mark, you're in postmenopause. Some of the symptoms settle down, some of them will still require managing, and all this is an incredibly individual experience. Everybody's experience of perimenopause and menopause is very different. The kind of symptoms we might expect to see are the classic hot flushes, which originate in the brain, along with all sorts of other things that originate in the brain, our mood swings, anxiety, memory loss, what we call brain fog, which is a kind of mixture of memory loss and fatigue. We might experience aches and pains. During perimenopause, we might experience some really quite mad menstrual symptoms. We might experience bladder symptoms and the effects on other intimate parts of our body. We might have changes in our immune system. We might notice changes in our body shape and our weights. And we might see our blood pressure go up. We might have heart palpitations. Altogether, there are very, very many symptoms. And not everybody gets them all. Some people, there's about 20% of us get through menopause relatively easy, and about 20% for whom it is life-changing, and the rest of us are somewhere in the middle. I'm 58 and waiting, love, so so we'll get there by the law of averages. If 10% of people are getting there before 45, then some of us are getting there quite a bit later. But a hugely individual experience, and we don't
really
want symptoms.
Really, really helpful introduction there, Helen. And I think I can imagine a lot of people who are listening in nodding as you reeled off the list of symptoms, as they kind of, we could actually, if we'd been more organized, we'd have played menopause, perimenopausal symptom bingo. And we could have seen who got house first. But anyway, we missed that opportunity. It's something to come back to. Jules, so we've just heard from Helen about, what we mean when we talk about technically when we're talking about menopause and perimenopause. Tell us how this played out for you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Helen. I really wish I'd heard that at 46. And then I might have had some sense of what was going to happen to me. So I think it was about, funnily enough, I've just been interviewed by my daughter who's doing GCSE health and social care, and she chose menopause as one of her subjects. And so I had this big, long interview. So I feel like I've been interviewed about it by my daughter the other day. And we decided it was about 48 where I think I went into perimenopause, not having any clue about that at all. And so that was, and that started, I think, on an emotional level. So I was probably a bit more hormonal. It's a bit like a bad PMT, I think, probably to a certain extent. But then it was ongoing. It didn't stop. But some really weird things, which I remembered when my daughter was interviewing me. I had really sore feet, and I was working in London at the time, and I struggled to walk for long distances, and it was like I had flat feet. And so since then, I've only ever worn wedges, and I wear fly wedges, and that's the only shoes that seem to do. But actually, I don't think they're bad anymore. So that was one really interesting one. My skin was really itchy, so I had a lot of physical things as well when I look back, that just at the time I just didn't realize that they were linked to perimenopause at all. And I said that the perimenopause for me was much worse than actually when I reached menopause. I think I felt like it was all over by then. And I went through a lot. I had a change in a job. My mum got dementia. My son got excluded from school. I have ADHD. So everything collided into this one big, and I was blaming all those things though. But I realized actually I'm quite a resilient person. I'm usually pretty like wing things and get through life very easily. And suddenly I wasn't getting through life easily. And I was blaming it on these really quite big issues of in my life, but my resilience was really low, so I wasn't coping at all with that. So I left the job. I changed jobs a couple of times, fell out with the charity I was working for, and you know, and that was really not a nice experience. And then I went self-employed, and so I was doing consultancy work, and I love public speaking usually. And, you know, and I talk about SEN, I'm very passionate about special needs and inclusion. And I started doing consultancy work, which was quite successful. And I was doing well, but I started to get this anxiety that is really unlike me. And I would wake up in the morning with butterflies. I couldn't understand why. And then I just started to dread public speaking, and I lost my confidence, and I became more and more anxious about going. I couldn't sleep the night before, and I was dreading it so much that I thought, I don't want to, you know, I've always enjoyed my work, so I don't want to be like this. So I was really lucky though, because to link with my consultancy work, I was doing some supply teaching in this school that I'm in now, and they just sort of persuaded me over a number of months to join them permanently. And I kept going, oh, I'd lost my confidence so much. They said, will you apply for the English teacher post? I was like, oh no, I'm fine like this. I like being a supply teacher. I just hide away in my room. I teach English. I don't speak to anybody. You know, I didn't know the staff. You know, I didn't have to go to any staff meetings, so I was just hiding myself away in my safe sector of a classroom with pupils. That's what I knew. That's what I was comfortable with. And then eventually I became head of Key Stage 3 here and assistant head. And over that time, I went into the full menopause. And so, as I said, there's sort of life after menopause for me. And it's really quite liberating. Now I keep saying to people, it's wonderful, you know, it's just like having a lovely time, and everything's really lovely. But when it was bad, it was very, very bad. And I just wish I'd known someone like Helen that could have taught me through that and explained it. I think that would have really helped. And also, I think I still would have coped with all those really, you know, bad experiences that I went through had I known more about the perimenopause. So that for me was, that's my story in a nutshell. About menopause.
Well, that's incredibly generous of you to share. And actually, I'm very struck by both of you saying how significant the perimenopause is and how affecting it can be. And I'm bang in the middle of this. I completely relate. You know, the sudden disruption to sleep and the itchiness. Oh my God, Jules! You know, I tried every body cream there is known to mankind in the hope of making it calm down. I mean, I think people will recognize that, but actually you're right. We all know we all have a sense of menopause, but it's very recently that it's become possible to talk about perimenopause and how disruptive that is. So I think it's hugely important. And I guess, Helen, coming to you, and actually I'll come back to you on this as well, Jules. When we think about leading schools and colleges, and we think about the culture that we have, and we want to, you know, anyone who's come here with that on their agenda, and there's a lot of people in the room, and I'm delighted to see you. But what actually should people be thinking about doing in order to be supportive, in order to be a good employer around this, Helen?
Well, I think the first thing is that you do need a menopause policy. That is your starting point. So that allows you to do several things. First of all, it allows you to give some information about perimenopause and menopause that to be available to your staff. And because one of the most devastating things is when it goes unrecognized. And if it's unrecognized, we can't make the choices we need to make. So your menopause policy, first of all, allows you to do that. It allows you to let people know that it is okay to talk about it and who they can talk about it with and what they can expect from that conversation. So a lot of teachers who talk to me say things like, well, I can't talk about it because they won't understand. They'll think I'm ridiculous. It'll go against me if I go for promotion. blah, blah, blah. And so your menopause policy will signal that that is absolutely not the case. So that's the place you start, is your menopause policy. If you're looking for an example of a menopause policy, the best place I would suggest you start is the National Education Union. They have a sample one on their website, which you can adapt. So that's where I would start, is your menopause policy. But then the next thing you're thinking about is how you change your culture, how you create a culture in your school where people know it's okay to talk about menopause. And the way you're going to have to do that is someone's going to have to start talking about it, uncomfortable and though it may be. And sometimes it's me, and sometimes it's a senior leader. Sometimes you may even want to have somebody with experience of well-being to take a role as a menopause champion. There are different ways of doing that, but you're going to have to start off by kind of just cracking your culture open so it becomes a place where we can talk about menopause.
Brilliant. Love that. And there's a couple of pieces on this I want to come back to, but Jules, just before we do you want to add anything there to what Claire said in terms of leadership, culture, how we do it well?
Yeah, I think absolutely. It was quite interesting when just on our first meeting back after the Christmas holidays, we were talking. I walked into our staff meeting. I was a little bit late, and someone said, "Oh, we're doing cracker jokes," and I just turned around and said, "Oh, I'm menopausal. I can't remember any jokes like that." And there was a slight sort of awkwardness in the room for some people, and some people like howled with laughter. So that was the difference between. But I'm absolutely, really passionate about. I'm not going to hide this. I'm proud of it. It's something that we all go through. So I probably talk about it too much, to a certain extent, because I feel it's really important to normalize it, and particularly in a place that education is 80% women. So we have got, and it's an aging. We've got a lot of women over 40 in education, and so it's really, really important that we do talk about this. The only other thing I wanted to say was, if somebody is brave enough to show their vulnerability with regards to menopause, don't then panic as a leader and think, oh, they're going to be terrible, and then start putting them on things like support plans or capability. That's the opposite of support. A support plan does not mean a support plan. A support plan is the opposite. So if they've been brave enough, it's like, what do you want us to do? Some might go, nothing, I just want to tell you, I'm absolutely fine, not a problem. Others might say, well, I'm just really struggling at the moment. And I just think you need to put it in their shoes. What do they want from this? Like you would with anything else. If somebody is suffering, sometimes a lot of people go through the menopause and it's not a problem. But if they are suffering and they've been brave enough to tell you, then I think you need to take that seriously, but not suddenly assume they're going to be awful and panic. Panic in the wrong way. Panic for them. Don't panic for their job and their performance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because of course we know through the whole gamut and range of conditions that people have, whether they fall under a disability banner or mental health, or people bring, or actually life experiences. When we have colleagues who are bereaved, people bring and carry a whole host of things with them all the time that are pressures on them and are competing for their energy and sit with them, because we don't put ourselves in a box when we go to work. People manage to work in incredible circumstances with all sorts of things. And I think it is so important as leaders, as you say, that point is really important, that we don't underestimate the ability of an individual to crack on and do what needs to be done. And oftentimes the validation of knowing that somebody's heard and appreciates and understands what you're going through is in itself hugely important, and sometimes enough.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
And I would also say in this moment, because I think there'll be some people thinking, I couldn't possibly say this to my line manager or my boss because he would never understand. And certainly I've had the experience of telling my line manager, who's a middle-aged man, that this was going on and would have an impact on was having an impact on me, and I didn't know the extent to which it would impact my work or not. I would say that he did a tremendous job, and as he pointed out, he'd had some experience around menopause, because it's not just women who get to see up close what happens with menopause. But Helen, I just wonder if you have anything else to say about how, you know, I think people are very comfortable, I notice, in a work environment talking between women, but not always more broadly. And I'm just curious, because you're in this day in, day out, what you've observed around that.
So, I mean, it's quite interesting. There are a few things that happen. Generally speaking, when I talk to men, they are interested and they are empathetic. And I think what happens, I think we mistrust them very often, because historically they haven't always been supportive, and because a little bit we've been brought up to keep these things to ourselves as well. You know, so men experience conversations that suddenly stop when they walk in the room. So I think a lot of men do have the potential to be our allies, and we do need to be brave and bring them into the conversation. And we also need to kind of signal our expectations from them, but trust them. I think we do need to trust them. And sometimes sometimes younger women can have quite a negative attitude when they see older women suffering from menopause. And I think that's quite complicated, because it links to the way we see women and aging. We don't always have positive ideas about women getting older, and I think that can influence other people's ideas. But I do think we need to remind younger women that this can happen younger than we think. About 1 in 1,000 women will actually reach full menopause, not perimenopause, before 30, which means, you know, there could be younger women experiencing perimenopausal symptoms in their 20s. So there is no age at which you are too young to find out about this. And if you could just excuse me for 5 minutes, one of my menopausal symptoms is I do have significant bladder issues, and I'm going to have to pay a little visit. I will be back very shortly. Thank you.
You crack on. I love the live role modeling of introducing in a work context dealing. You crack on, Helen. We'll be grand. Jules, I am struck by the number of questions that are coming through there around policies. I just want to come back to that for a minute. People saying our school, you know, do we have to have a policy? The menopause points have been wrapped into a wider well-being policy. And of course, there's questions around how you make policy, which, you know, Helen helpfully signposted us to the NEU, but of course, there's a million ways to generate a policy. I'm wondering, from your perspective in your role at work, whether you have some thoughts and reflections to share on that.
So we have a policy, and we decided to have a menopause policy because I think to keep it separate, you can put it in with everything else, but there's always those specifics around any policy, isn't there? But the other thing is, what you're doing by having a policy is keeping it out in the open. You're validating it, like you were talking about. Other people, you know, if we're in a recruitment and retention crisis, so if someone goes on your website and they see that there's a menopause policy, that's pretty positive for somebody of 45, 50 that might be going for a job with you. So I think it helps on a sales front, you know, to get good staff. So I think there's many advantages to having that policy. It needs not to be a tick box, because, you know, sort of if you know, again, the NEU have an excellent one. I'm an NEU member, and that's a great one. We used that. There was something in the key we used. There was something, we put my article that I'd written for the test, we put that in it. And just so it, you know, it looks like a real and authentic policy, that we're not just putting it there as a tick box. And I think that's important, you know. So if do try and personalize it to your school, and maybe get some people that are happy to be part of that, you know, to have a working party to create what do they want, what type of school are you, and what type of policy do you want, what would be helpful to you.
And certainly involving, sorry, go on ahead, Helen, there, you wanted to come in.
Different schools have different limitations as to what they can do about menopause, and different things that are causing problems. You know, some schools might be on a split site, some people might be a long way from a toilet. There are very individual things within a school that need taken account of within your policy.
Well, absolutely, so that it's not generic in that sense. It does take account of those things. But it also seems to me, and the point that you made there, Jules, about having the opportunity to talk to people, you know, in the broadest sense across the kind of school or college community, is really important, because I think one of the things that's quite powerful in having an inclusive and collaborative approach to developing or sharing out a policy at whatever point and however you choose to do that is that in itself is an opportunity to address stigma, isn't it? Because you're raising it and it's up for conversation. I think there were some workplace, we were laughing in our workplace here because there was more than me who would relate to this topic. But also actually you can't just assume that because a number of people in an organization feel comfortable discussing it, that everybody does, or that they're in the same groups. And I think the policy does that bit of making it more widely available, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm sure Helen has seen that too. I think it is the authenticity of it and the intent behind the policy that is probably really important.
Yeah. And if we come back to individuals, and there's a piece then to go back, we talked at the beginning of some of the symptoms and what's actually happening for people. But if somebody is in their early or mid 40s and they're starting to experience perimenopausal symptoms, but they haven't, they're not really aware that that's going on, what are the kinds of things that they might describe that other people could be listening out to? If you want to be a good and supportive colleague or a good and supportive line manager, are there things that we should be aware of that people might be experiencing that they haven't necessarily recognized for themselves?
I think, well, I'm sure Helen's got some lots of examples of that, but for me, I was thinking it's a really hard one because, a bit like with when we talk about periods and they go, oh, it's a time of the month, it's like, oh, she's going through the menopause or something, or get some HRT. I think that there could be a really negative view of that. So I think people are quite nervous about sort of saying, oh, do you think you're going through, that? So I think that's why it's really important to have information out and about and policy.
Yep.
So it's there, and so they can sort of find out themselves. So you might want to sort of ask them, dig a little bit deeper. Is there something happening with you at the moment? You seem a bit different. But I think it would have to be very gentle, because I would be like a bull in a china shop if I turned around and said to somebody, I think you're going through your menopause. I think it could be really like, they might not
Absolutely.
be, so I think we'd have to be really careful about that. But having all the information out and about, and just a very open dialogue that it's talked about a lot, I think maybe people might recognize it more. I had an example, a younger teacher just came in because they knew I was doing this webinar. I've got a classic teacher. I've got this laminate, a piece of old laminate with some thing, I'm in a webinar, please don't come in. So if somebody comes in, they haven't read the sign. But she said, oh, and I told her what I was doing. She goes, oh, I don't know any older colleagues, that have been through the menopause. She goes, oh, I'm really interested. I'm going to listen to that later. So, I think just modeling that it's nothing to be ashamed of, that there is life during and after menopause, and it's not all doom and gloom, I think is probably, powerful enough.
Well, and that bit about using, colleagues are talking about it in the chat there, using internal newsletters, making sure that there is information available that may allow somebody to reflect for themselves and come to that if they haven't got other sources of information, seems incredibly important.
And that's what keeps your menopause policy a living document, that you're always just drip feeding little bits of information to people. You're always reminding people of it, so it doesn't just get shoved in a drawer or a computer drive and sort of be forgotten about.
Yeah. So if we've got a good menopause policy, and if we've got good communications regularly going out, and we've got maybe even we're living in a good enough environment where people are discussing, and happy to share some of their own experiences openly, what else should people be thinking about from a leadership or a culture perspective? What else is goes along with good support for colleagues around menopause and perimenopause?
So we get into the territory of talking about reasonable adjustments, which are again usually individuals. So you need that conversation between somebody who might be struggling with menopause and somebody in senior leadership who is able to do something about it, and possibly with the support of somebody else if you had a menopause champion or a well-being person, for example. And then you get into that conversation about what's going on and what you can do about it. And we're a little bit limited in schools because other people that do my job that work in industry, the first thing they talk about is flexible working. And flexible working is a different beast in schools than it is in other environments, and it certainly doesn't involve rocking up when you feel like it. There are flexible working options that can be discussed. They may involve things like compressing a timetable so that somebody gets a little bit of a chunk of time off. It may involve allowing them to spend that time at home. It may involve people deciding to reduce their hours but keeping their responsibility points. So there are things that can be done within that flexible working bracket, but of course, if somebody chooses to reduce their hours, then that comes as a financial penalty, and it's very much not what everybody wants. So we start thinking about the practical things, and we've just seen one of those practical things. It's okay for me to say, I'm sorry, I really do have to go. Now, if you're in a classroom, especially if you're in a classroom like I was when you've got 30 kids with Bunsen burners, not a chance. No. You're responsible for those kids. Okay, I was going to suggest something slightly more subtle than shouting menopausal emergency, although if it works, it works.
Love it.
One of the things some of the schools I work with do is a lot of schools have a system for behavioural support where they can send a little email that goes into a monitored email box, and somebody will kind of send out the Foreign Legion to come over and support you. Now, you can have a similar system to that for menopause, or indeed for any well-being emergency, that kind of, you can quickly email. You can even have a code word if you're feeling shy about this. Quickly email for somebody to pop along to your classroom and say, excuse me, there's just something in the office that needs your attention. I'll stand with your class for 5 minutes.
Brilliant. So
that's one of the things that works. You may want to think about where somebody's classroom is compared to the toilets, if toilets are an issue. And you may want to think about what supplies and lockers and things there are near the toilets, because sometimes perimenopausal bleeding needs changes of clothes. Sometimes it really can be that drastic. So there are all sorts of things you can do around what I kind of call toilet troubles.
And actually, that's not, I mean, I think it's important to say as well for people who don't know, I mean, doesn't happen to everybody, but it's also not extremely unusual. That can be.
It can be a problem. And also, it's not just menopause. There are younger women who can be struggling with, bleeding, especially those who perhaps have endometriosis and things like that, or fertility treatment can cause similar kind of problems. And I noticed somebody mentioned men. Some of our older male staff do also have prostate issues, which can make toileting. So having that conversation, we've just accepted for a long, long time that teachers have cast iron bladders and that's the end of it. But having those conversations about what we do about getting to the toilet are actually quite important.
Well, I think what's really important in what you're saying, Helen, is I think that whole area of anything to do with the toilet has tremendous potential for shame for individuals. And actually, we do need to get past that. We do need to be able to have adult conversations around
normal bodily function.
Exactly. This is what bodies do. This is how it plays out. It's glamorous stuff, guys, but this is how it goes.
So we usually end up talking about other things that get to people are very often the aches and pains of various sorts that are happening because of changes in muscle tone and our body's tendency to inflammation. Can be a lot of joint pains, and I work with a lot of primary teachers who spend a lot of time crouching down. So sometimes thinking about the ergonomics of our classroom can be important, so that when we do sit, we have a comfortable and supportive place to sit. Do you know, I spoke to somebody from a school once who said that the senior leaders had removed all the chairs because they felt that teachers should be on their feet.
Gosh. More work to do, don't we? Really, really interesting.
And then we get onto the brain fog stuff, which is
well, before we come to that, I just want to check in with Jules. Jules, in terms of that, because what I really like about what Helen's been talking there is it's really practical. And as you made the point early on about we just need to normalize this, which is why it's so important to speak. Do you think there's anything else that's really practical that people in leadership roles in schools can be thinking about doing
Do you know,
and colleges.
for individuals as well, this is because one of the things, and this is probably around me, because the brain fog is, you know, when you've got ADHD, you kind of have that anyway. So it's just like that on speed almost, you know, when I got through the menopause. But so one of the things I want to say was to look to their strengths. So, you know, because often what we do, oh, so and so struggling, you know, and there's a bit of a panic maybe, and support plans and all this awful capability stuff. But actually, what are they really good at? Because can we give them more of that to do during this time and take away some of the other stuff? So for me, admin is I have a real thing about organization and admin. It's part of my makeup, and actually through my menopause it just got worse. So I was booking 3 things on the same day and not even putting that together in my head that they were, you know, they were the same event on the same time, and they were 3 separate events, and I couldn't work it out anyway. So but I could, you know, at the time I could happily talk in front of 500 people. I know later on I got anxiety, but I love writing schemes of work. You know, there's so many things that I'm really good at, and I think when you lose your confidence and your self-esteem, you need someone to say, well, hang on a minute, you do that really well and you do that really well, can we give you more of that, and maybe take away some of your planning, or give you a bit of admin support, or, you know, all those things. What are the things you are struggling with? Because you won't be, the thing is, it's not the end of the world, the menopause. It's just that there's a few things that you will struggle with. So what are the things you're still good at and you're still confident at? So that completely changed the conversation around, because suddenly you're like, you know, what are your superhero things? We'll worry about the other bits. We want to keep you, we want to value you, we want you to do a good job. At the end of the day, it's for the kids. So, you know, and so I think looking at their strengths is really important. And then just on an individual level, your working memory, your cognitive overload, all the stuff we're talking about in schools at the moment, goes to pot. And I remember once listening to Obama talking about how he always wears the same stuff because he didn't want to have to think about what he was wearing, because he had more important things like running America to do. So, you know, in that same style, you know, I like to think big. I was like, well, how can I reduce my cognitive overload? So there's certain things. So for instance, tights, I could cry in the morning because the 4th pair of tights I had a ladder in them. And that could completely flip me for the day. So I wear snag tights now because they're a brand. Sorry, I'm not on commission, but they're lovely colours, so they're very bright. They never ladder, so I never have the stress in the morning now of in the winter nights and those dark mornings worrying about laddered tights. I've talked about my fly shoes because my flat feet are sore, so now I wear fly shoes. I have 5 pairs of fly shoes and boots. I've just found an underwear company called Lemonade that are amazing, and all, you know, so, and I wear popsy dresses. And, you know, so I've got all these things. So my getting dressed in the morning is not an issue anymore. So, you know, it's easy. And so you have to make your life easy for yourself. So, you know, obviously not everybody wants to wear popsy dresses or whatever, but, you know, it's like finding the things that work for you and make it easy and take away all the other stuff, because you've got to concentrate on yourself and your, you know, your job and your life at the moment. So sorry, that was just a little tip for people if they want some tips on easy dressing.
I think that's superb. I know that I have become the queen of dressing in layers now.
Yeah.
That's my real talent, and
Layers,
I can,
yes,
you know, they're on and off to beat the band.
Mm.
And carrying nuts around, because I find my blood sugar is a little bit less reliable, but a handful of nuts goes a long way, particularly if it's a day that's not the normal day at your desk. You know, if you're just not going to have a normal routine,
Yeah.
which can happen with, you know, if you're in secondary and you've got one of those days where you don't have time to do anything.
Yeah.
Thinking about, you know, I think things like how we react to sugar can change, and so what it is that you're eating and what it is you have to hand seems to me to be, as I've found anyway, to be quite important.
And that's a level of self-care, isn't it? And I think when we lose our self-esteem and things are going, I think sometimes self-care also goes, you know. So I didn't care what I looked like or if I smelled or anything for a while, you know, I mean, kind of, but, you know, so it's kind of important to value yourself, isn't it?
Well, on that subject, you may find you need a different deodorant.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to mention these things.
Well, because everything changes, and the hormones and the chemicals are all different.
Changes, absolutely.
And also, you might not care, you know. I mean, I'm sure for a while I really didn't care what, you know, about myself at all. I mean, I was just trying to get one foot in front of the other and walking through treacle. So, you know, for a while I wouldn't have cared. So it's kind of trying to I would say if you had a friend that was in that, trying to get them into, I don't know, just take them for a sauna or a swim, or, you know, just try and do something nice for them, and that's quite healthy and about self-care.
I noticed somebody said on their healthy eating is key, and so is wine. And to the point of wine, one of the shocking things to me as I came into perimenopause was I can't drink very much, which is really upsetting. But I have to really be careful what I drink. It really makes me feel unwell. But one of the things I did to offset my disappointment was I pick a really nice bottle of wine. And I might not drink very much of it, but I'll really enjoy, you know, what I drink. And so I think re-establishing our ways of, you know, some of the things that we might have done historically, we're just not going to do now, or we're going to have to do differently, but finding a way to do it. And indeed, Emma, I aspire to give it up. I think that's probably where I should get to. But I still enjoy the odd glass and the odd pint of Guinness, and that's okay as long as I keep it at that level. I think non-alcoholic drinks are fantastic. Actually, there's a whole host of things out there that are worth exploring for people. Helen, did you want to say any more about nutrition specifically?
I think the sugar thing really does our insulin system seems to be challenged by perimenopause. And one of the things we know about what's happening in the brain is that our brain cells are metabolizing differently. In other words, they're burning sugar. They're just a little bit slower at burning sugar. And of course, because our hormones are fluctuating, they're doing that in a fluctuating way. So if they're getting peaks and troughs of sugar coming at our little brain cells, we're putting them under more strain. So if you can kind of keep your blood sugar level fairly constant, which means that, you know, when you are on those kind of long days and you're not getting you're not getting the breaks, your energy's flagging, things like nuts are much better than reaching for sweets and things like that. So yes, absolutely, cutting down on sugar. We're supposed to eat a little bit more protein. We definitely should be eating plants, because as many as possible, because we're trying to look after our gut biome, which may be implicated in this. And you know, to a certain extent, we're doing all the things that we always knew were healthy and we got away without doing.
Well, but it's interesting you say that. So, and there's a question that's come up here about HRT that I think we should turn to. So I started on HRT and it was dreadful. I had a really bad response to it. I ended up with edema. I've ended up limping and being on crutches because it banjaxed my knee for months. So it really didn't go well. And I then threw myself fairly wholeheartedly into the diet stuff. And it is interesting because some of the physical symptoms are much better for, you know, probably 9 months at this point of changing my diet. So whilst I would have been a bit eye-rolly about that in the past, I mean, I would eat well, but I would be a bit like, really, am I going to eat my way out of the menopause? I don't think so. It has proved in my particular case to be very helpful. But I see there's a question in there about HRT, and I know there'll be people who are interested to hear a little bit about that, Helen. I know you'll have a point of view.
It is, as with all these things, it's a balance of risk and benefit. And of course, the risks are different to different people and the benefits are different to different people. What I would say is that very often it's not the complete answer. It's certainly a very good way of managing symptoms, but it may not manage all the symptoms. Now, we do absorb it differently and it is worth experimenting with different doses, but I would say you do need to do the lifestyle stuff as well. And I get a bit eye-rolly about things that I think are woo-woo, but actually there's really good evidence that meditation and mindfulness actually strengthens the very bits of the brain that are being affected by those estrogen fluctuation. And incidentally, they are the same bits of the brain that are implicated in ADHD as well. So that meditation and mindfulness, breath work, very, very useful. A good exercise routine, very, very useful. So all those things will back up the HRT. Mostly when people struggle with HRT, it is to do with not liking the progesterone. Some women are very sensitive to progesterone. In fact, we think that PMDD is when we're oversensitive to our own progesterone. So very often it is progesterone that people overreact to. And there are different ways of exploring of getting your progesterone, either through patch or through the micronized progesterone. And some specialists will even, it's not unlicensed, but they will even let you use the Utrogestan vaginally as a way of managing the womb lining, because that's why we need the progesterone, to stop the womb lining growing out of control. But I would say you need to kind of get at this from all the different angles, the medical angle, the HRT angle, and there's a new drug coming out soon, which should be very exciting. But you need to think about those lifestyle things as well. A lot of people tell me about magnesium. A lot of people have really good results with magnesium, and of course anything green has magnesium in it, plants full of magnesium. So, and really most people should be taking vitamin D in the winter, because look at it, there's only that much of me ever shows, about 6 square inches ever shows in the winter, and there's rubbish sunlight. So
vitamin D,
all those things worth thinking about.
Jules, I want to come back to just thinking about brain fog. You spoke about it, and just a little bit, would you mind saying a little bit more about what that feels like? Because I think sometimes people are thinking, oh, I don't know, what do I, is that brain fog? Is that what that is? Would you, that would be really lovely if you would.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because we say brain fog, don't we? And I'm not even sure if I was having brain fog, because what is, you know, because it's a funny, it's a good term, but it is a tricky one. I think for me, what happened was memory. So I would be halfway through a sentence and suddenly go, what was I saying? Or, you know, so I couldn't quite remember the end of the sentence, which is why I linked to that public speaking, because I would have slides which I'd use as a prompt, but I'd still find myself in my head. I remember sometimes I'd have things going, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? And I was sort of talking and thinking, what am I going to say at the same time? And I'm sure I probably didn't make any sense. So that was one for brain fog. And then like I said before about booking lots of different things, like double booking and triple booking myself. And there was some kind of fog around there that I just couldn't link time and space together, you know. So I'd say, oh yeah, I'm going to see you at that thing, aren't you? And they'd go, yeah, it's tomorrow. And I go, oh no, I'm doing that tomorrow. And I was like, oh yeah. You know, so I got really mixed up with time, space, all sorts of days, months, years. You know, that was a real brain fog for me. And I think also I felt a little bit like I wasn't quite fully conscious. I don't know if that sounds really weird, but I was sort of living about 80% conscious the whole time. So I never stopped to fully understand everything. So, you know, it sounds a really weird thing to say, but I'd be so busy. So I'd keep myself. I had this, like, I called it busyness. And for a couple of years, I was doing so much stuff. It was almost like I was trying to fill my life with so much stuff. So I don't know, for whatever reason, to forget about other things or what. But within that busyness, I was like almost on another plane. I'm not being very articulate about it because it was a really weird time for me. But I think for me, that's what brain fog was. I couldn't retrieve information very quickly. But I have all those issues anyway because of ADHD. So that's one of the things about it. It just became much worse, you know, whereas before my ADHD kind of allowed me to almost have it as a superpower. I'd risk take, and I'm back to that now. You know, I take risks. I'm not worried. I'm very confident. Talk and friendly with people. But at that time, it was always the worst parts of me that were coming out, and I think that for me was brain fog, really, just not quite being 100% there. So,
I think that it's really helpful, and I think that it's not confusion in that we don't know, you know, which way to unscrew the top of the bottle, but it's, you know, I'm doing this and yet part of me is not really present to it, or I'm going to try and do too many things but not really know, you know. I think that's really helpful. It's a sort of
present is a really good term. So I wasn't present for a good couple of years.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot in that. And I guess, and Helen, then the other bit that I guess we hear at Education Sport, I think one of the things that we'll hear people talking about in relation to menopause is for the first time in their lives, people will experience something that they feel is a mental health condition. That, you know, they may be diagnosed with anxiety or depression, or indeed a number of other things. They may experience panic attacks. There's things that people will experience that they haven't historically experienced. And I'm curious whether that's what you are finding in your work, and whether there's any more you want to say on that. And you're on mute.
That's because I was typing something and I didn't want my click into. So very often that is the first place it shows up, in anxiety and in depression. And so it's really important at that point that we realize that it is menopause. So that's the time when, if you don't have a history of those things and they are happening as you get older, then that's the time to just have a think about what else is going on. What very often happens is we get one symptom which is just getting up to us to such a degree that it seems to take over, and then we don't notice everything else that's happening. And one of the things it's really useful to do is to make a date with yourself every month or so and sit down with a list of symptoms and get yourself a brew, shut the door, keep everybody out, and sit down and really take stock of what is going on, so that you can see whether, is this anxiety? And after all, we're in a very, we're still post-COVID, we're in a very stressful job. Anxiety does happen. Or is this anxiety actually happening in a context where in which we're seeing other things, and in which case it is probably perimenopause. And perimenopausal anxiety is different to general anxiety. It's often diagnosed as general anxiety, but it is different. It feels differently, and it's managed differently.
Really helpful. So I'm going to come in a moment and ask both of you around, and I suppose my last question is around where people can find support if they want further support after this. I know that colleagues here at Education Support would want me to let everybody know that we have an 08000 number that's free, confidential, 24/7, staffed by qualified counsellors who are really good at having conversations. So if you are experiencing something and you're not quite sure where to go with it, our team is always on the end of the phone, and you can find them there. And I believe we also today, in fact, have published a new resource around menopause. I know, Helen, you're going to have other recommendations, both of you will, but I also want to just make I've got one comment I want to make, and I want to, before we come to the final bit around where you would signpost people for help, there's questions in the chat there around andropause, and how should we be having a policy for men who are experiencing symptoms that are, I guess, age and life stage related. And I guess, Helen, just quickly from you, if you have a point of view on that.
So not all men suffer from low testosterone, but some do. It's not entirely the same as perimenopause, because you're not getting that fluctuation, but there's no doubt that low testosterone can have some similar things to do with mood changes and loss of muscle tone and fatigue and similar issues. And again, men need to be informed about that, and they do need to be prepared to go. It's really quite easily it's quite easily tested for, and the NHS will usually give a testosterone gel. I know, because my partner takes it. I keep threatening to steal it off him if I ever find, because of course women do also sometimes suffer from testosterone deficiency. It's not quite perimenopausal, it's that gradual decline, the same as it is in men. Prostate issues we've already mentioned. Do we need a separate policy? What I tend to do is, when I write policies for school, we make it clear that the policy also covers people perhaps having issues with endometriosis or fertility issues or menstruation, or men having age-related issues. And indeed, we do point out that there will be people who identify as men who experience a menopause.
Yep.
So I tend to kind of just make it clear at the head of the policy that we do, those people should also feel absolutely welcome to access support.
Really helpful. And I'm as I make the comment I want to make sure I land, I'm going to ask you also, Helen, if you've got a sentence or two on Karen's question around how is perimenopausal anxiety? How does it feel different from general anxiety? But the point I wanted to land that I've written in big letters so I don't forget, no memory jokes here, people, thank you very much, was around blood pressure and hypertension. For women, postmenopausally, hypertension becomes a much bigger issue. And actually women are hugely underdiagnosed for blood pressure, hypertension, and heart conditions, which remain one of the worst things in terms of mortality that affect us on quite a huge scale. And so I just want to put a call out to everybody as you're coming through or on the other side of menopause. Go and get your blood pressure checked. It may never have been an issue for you ever. You don't necessarily notice when it's high. It's not, some people really do, some people really don't. And a lot of women are walking around with dangerously high levels of hypertension, which of course can lead to heart issues, but also can lead to stroke. And so a plea from me to, if you haven't in the last year checked your blood pressure, please go and do that. Helen, anxiety, and then we'll have the last word on where to go to for support.
So I can talk about my experience here. I ended up diagnosed with general anxiety disorder and with a CBT therapist who kept saying things like, your anxiety is coming from your thoughts. What's the thought that springs the anxiety? And I'm saying, no, that's not what's happening. The thought does not come before the anxiety. The anxiety is just there. It's not from thoughts. It's a feeling. It's churning away. It kicks in the moment I get up. It's just like a little in the back of my head, and it's not coming from my thoughts. And I think this is a feeling, not a thinking process.
I think it's probably worth saying as well that for people who don't, and you know, most people don't pay too much attention to the nuance of therapy. I think CBT has its place and certainly is a really helpful therapeutic approach, but it's very particular, and it's not for every circumstance.
No, it's not, and I think if it's going to be used for menopause, then people need to understand that menopausal anxiety is different to generalized anxiety, and it feels, our experiences of it is different, and the big clue is that it happens to people who have never been anxious before.
And that was me, Helen. You know, absolutely, that I'm not an anxious person. I'm many things, but anxiety was never a thing. You know, I could do all sorts of stuff and never feel nervous. And I was waking up with butterflies, and they were coming from nowhere. Literally coming from nowhere. Yeah, so I completely concur. That's different.
And I think for anyone who wants to explore that, that is a really good use of our helpline. You've got a clinician on the other end who can help you work through what might or might not be useful as a sounding board. You know, actually, and so I would really recommend that to anyone who wants to have a further conversation about that. Right, each of you, where would you signpost people for more information? Where can they get help? What's your top tip?
I'd probably now say you. So, you know, but you know, your it looks amazing, some of your resources and stuff. So yeah, absolutely. The NEU are really good. I don't know, I'm sure all unions are. It's my union, so but they've got some great stuff. And we're always, for our staff, there's lots of different areas where you can get help and menopause support, not just your GP. So most schools now and local authorities have some places where teachers can just speak, and I would recommend for all schools, we've put, there's about 6 or 7 different numbers, and I will add yours onto it, that we have, you know, so if people are struggling in any way, just ring one of these numbers and get some support, just have a chat, see where it leads you.
Great. And Helen, you've got menopauseinschools.co.uk, your own website. You're an expert in this, so obviously you're somebody who people can talk to.
There's a blog on there. I also have a Facebook group, if people are on Facebook, called it Effing Menopause, which people effing menopauses. I'll write that in the chat later, which people are very welcome to join. And the other place I would flag up is the Women's Health Concern, which is it's the patient wing of the British Menopause Society. Lots of resources on there, including how to find a private specialist if you need one, including lots and lots of fact sheets. And the great thing I think about that particular website is that if you need to kind of take evidence to your doctor, it's the British Menopause Society. They can't argue with it.
That's quite helpful. I have to say, I read through their handbook, the British Menopause Society's handbook, which, because I'm a geek and I like to read things, it was fantastic. You know, some of it's a bit technical, but there is, depending on whether you want something quite digestible or you want something that's a lot more technical, there are a range of resources out there. So do look around. It's been a delight having you all here. What a splendid collection of people you are. There you go. There's the Menopause Manifesto. A splendid collection of participants. The chat has been fantastic. I'm sure that my colleagues will be asking you for feedback when they send out a recording of the session. Tell us what you thought. Tell us what else we should be putting webinars on about. But most of all, look after yourselves and stay well. And thank you for those of you who've come here because you want to create better workplace environments for people. Thank you. And tell your colleagues and tell people in other schools and colleges what you're doing. And let's get people talking about this across the sector. To Jules and Helen, thank you so much. Your generosity and sharing has been fantastic. And it just makes it all much more real, I think, for people to hear the stories and hear your experience. So thank you for that. Super excellent. And there's a lot of love in the chat there. You can see it.
Great chat.
Right. Thank you all so much.
I
wish everybody a fantastic evening. May your evening be full of, I don't know, nuts and mindfulness and maybe whatever else it is that floats your boat. But look after yourself and take care. Thanks a million. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, Helen. Bye.